I'm quite sure that a lot of you guys have heard of the most recent indictments that have been levied against Donald J. Trump as he runs for president of the United States of America. Now, one thing that was really weird about this, though, that I think kind of got overshadowed is that one form of the indictments were released to Reuters even before the grand jury finished convening and seeing all of the evidence. Now, by the way, for any of you guys who are not particularly familiar with how the process works, the grand jury first is supposed to hear all of the evidence and then listen to what all the witnesses have to say before they can then move forward and present some charges that they can then recommend they get indicted with. So the process was going on as usual, right? The grand jury was collecting evidence, examining it, and they were hearing from witnesses. But lo and behold, randomly, Reuters got a hold of a document. Actually, Timcast here explains it better. Fulton County shares removes content detailing fourth Trump indictment. Now, there's been a mismatch of the information that has been put out. Reuters said that the document was legitimate. They indeed did receive it from Fulton County, but then the Georgia District Attorney's spokesperson then went and said that the charges that were filed were inaccurate, and they also claimed that they were false documents too. Now, this got people upset, incensed. Some people were saying, they already decided to indict Trump even before the grand jury had finished convening. To be honest, we don't entirely know everything that happens behind the scenes. I am hearing that there is a case where, some people will create a draft of such a document. So it is possible that such a draft got published early on accident. And, another thing too to consider is that, Trump ended up getting indicted with fewer, counts and charges than were in the, leaked document, because the document here had 13 charges against the president, and I believe that the current charges are now standing at 10. But anyways, this was a rather odd scenario because this is just not something that typically happens where, a document that includes all the charges gets released before the grand jury has even finished convening. And a lot of people took note of that. And of course, one of them being Donald Trump, who was a subject of investigation at this point. Here he just went on this very, very long screed, whining and complaining about the whole situation, calling the district attorney a rabid partisan who was campaigning and fundraising on a platform of prosecuting Donald Trump through these bogus indictments, which is true, by the way. It's actually rather interesting. She is indeed campaigning on this issue. She actually launched a campaign website or something on the same day that these documents were released prematurely. I did find that rather interesting. Now, of course, reactions have not only been limited to Donald Trump. Glenn Greenwald here actually had an interesting observation.
You definitely have a good chance to convict Donald Trump, but they're playing with fire here. If you think that half the country that already perceives almost every leading institution of authority to be fundamentally and institutionally corrupted is just going to sit by while what they perceive to be happening, which is that the law is being radically abused by the incumbent president to criminalize and put in prison his leading oppositional candidate in the context of this perception that already exists, you're essentially telling them that they have no more democratic means to use as an expression for their anger. And that's when you start inciting all sorts of violent action, which is what you saw on January 6th. I think the effects are going to be a lot worse than whatever their worst nightmare is about a Trump victory. They definitely have a...
Now, this is a very interesting take. I think that one thing that can be dangerous with takes like these is I think it can sort of, cause people to excuse such violence if it occurs, because people be like, oh, well, what else did you expect? After all, violence is the language of the unheard. Right? It'd be interesting to hear the right, use that sort of rhetoric, by the way. That'd be rather interesting. But, I think he still does have a point. I think there are going to be a lot of people who feel disenfranchised and they feel like the entire system is conspiring against Donald Trump. And to a degree, I kind of do get that. I kind of do understand that. But I think if we're speaking in the context of 2024, I think that in some states, they did fortify their election. So I do think that at the very least there should be less doubt as far as the results of this upcoming election than there were in the last election, because there were quite a lot of irregularities, inconsistencies, a lot of strange things that happened in the lead up to Joe Biden being elected president. So I do think, though, that while a lot of people feel disenfranchised, they should not feel more disenfranchised now than they did then, because we all know, all the stuff that went down with a whole lot of people saying that, Donald Trump didn't win and whatever. And I kind of understand that to a degree. But I think that there should be less frenzy. Now, of course, whether or not there actually is, that's a whole nother conversation, right? But speaking of how this will affect 2024, I do think that this article here is rather interesting. A lot of analysis has demonstrated that, Donald Trump's support is sort of waning in the wake of these indictments. Now, I'm not sure if this is due to the indictments or due to other candidates looking better, but there are various polls here, as published by 538, that are revealing that among the general population, Donald Trump is seeming more and more, unfavorable, unelectable, right? We're seeing from various polls here, an unfavorable rating that is increasing anywhere from 6 points to as much as 29 points. Now, what I do like here that I think both 538 and Tim Cast here are saying is that, quote, horse race polls don't tell the whole story of Americans' reactions to the indictments, though. So that also is something fair to consider. And also, of course, you have to do the obligatory, right? Polls are not 100% accurate, right? This article here found a study from 2020 that found that, election polls were 95% confident, but only 60% accurate. And there's also a full study here, if you guys want to read the whole thing. But all of that to say is, first of all, the circumstances surrounding all of these indictments do seem a little bit suspect. If you could wait, 2, 3, 4 years to bring up these charges when no new evidence has been presented. They're just doing this now because Donald Trump's running for president. If you could wait 2, 3, years to present this information, you could wait maybe 5, 6 years and just wait until Donald Trump potentially is out of office. Wait until 2028 to prosecute all of these things, right? If you can't prosecute, if you're not going to prosecute these things when they happen, when people find out about them, then go ahead and wait until, certainly long after such a ruling could influence the future of American politics. Because it does seem like a lot of these investigations are politically motivated. I think that's a pretty fair take. But another thing to consider too is that, if you're considering whether or not these things are going to affect Donald Trump's chances at winning the presidency, yes, Donald Trump is looking more unfavorable to many according to the polls, but the polls don't tell the whole story. And, we see upsets sometimes, right? This is why we sit down and watch the polls close whenever there's like a primary or whatever. It's because you never know how things are going to shake out. But anyways, I just highly would recommend you guys, certainly a Pokemon Go to the polls. That was kind of cringe.